You know what? Even though I'm a Canucks fan, I love Connor McDavid. Watching this guy just speed around the ice and change the game with the way he plays is so awesome to me. And the gap between him and everybody else in the league as a collective personification is so wide. In fact, I don't really think there's anybody out there who really dislikes Connor McDavid. Well, of course, aside from Brendan Leipsic, but when it comes to Connor McDavid, I think everybody is kind of on the same page. Yeah, he is probably the best player in the league. Yeah, he is going to be so much better than he already is today sometime down the line, which is scary. And the only thing we're waiting to see is if Ken Holland is going to be able to build an Oilers team that can succeed at the same level as Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl can. But did you know the Vancouver Canucks could very well have prevented Connor McDavid from becoming an Edmonton Oiler? Let's talk today about the Cory Schneider trade, Bo Horvat, the Buffalo Sabres, Connor McDavid, and the Edmonton Oilers, and how it all relates together in a very weird collective story, I know that, but in a way that I think sounds pretty nice. Let's talk today about the 2013 NHL Entry Draft and the Vancouver Canucks. The Canucks at this time were in a very weird goaltender controversy. It was Schneider and it was Luongo. It was the big contract versus the new up-and-coming young hot American goalie from Boston who was so good at such a young age. Bobby Lou was on his way out, according to the idea that many Canucks fans and media and speculative sources thought. And it was only a matter of time before the Vancouver Canucks would trade Roberto Luongo. That was the idea that everybody had back in 2013, but at the 2013 NHL Entry Draft, that didn't actually happen, because instead, the Canucks decided to trade Cory Schneider instead. Now, it's actually interesting because Cory Schneider was rumored heavily to be going to the Edmonton Oilers a few minutes before he was actually traded. Here's a tweet from Darren Dreger. It's getting interesting. Two sources say Cory Schneider is in play. A first and a prospect is a part of the asking price. Suspect the Oilers are in on the talks. Now, this tweet was made at 5 a.m. back in that time frame, so for a brief moment throughout the day, there was this legitimate idea that Cory Schneider would be going from one West Coast city to another West Coast city within the span of the next few hours. But eventually, once the 2013 NHL Entry Draft started, the Oilers used up their first-round pick to select Darnell Nurse, and later on, the Vancouver Canucks traded Cory Schneider to the New Jersey Devils in a one-for-one trade. It was Cory Schneider to the New Jersey Devils in exchange for the 9th overall pick. The Canucks select Bo Horvat. Today, he is their captain. That story is done and dealt with. However, this is a quote here from Darren Dreger on TSN's broadcast of the draft. After the Canucks made the Cory Schneider trade, Darren Dreger said this on air. You can see, to some degree, a look of disbelief coming from the Edmonton Oilers. We know, we've reported all along, the Oilers were hot in the thick of things in negotiating with the Vancouver Canucks. You can appreciate why the Canucks wouldn't want to trade Schneider to a rival like Edmonton, and the expected rate of return from Edmonton, I'm told, was significant. It included a first-round draft pick, a second-round pick, and a top prospect. So that's a lot more, with all due respect, to the New Jersey Devils than what the Devils had just paid to acquire Cory Schneider. Here's a tweet from Ryan Rishaug a little bit after the draft. He said that he was told the asking price for Schneider was the 7th overall pick, which they used to select Darnell Nurse, a second-round pick, and a good young player. According to Rishaug, it's the Oilers that actually passed, but the way Darren Dreger was talking about it on TV made it seem like the Oilers were somewhat interested in giving up that package. At the end of the day, though, we never will know what exactly it was. Maybe the Canucks selected Bo Horvat at 7th overall if they get that pick instead of the 9th overall pick. But again, there's the added benefit of other assets that would have been included in a trade like that. The second-round draft pick for the Oilers that year was 56th overall. They selected Marco Waugh, who isn't really doing anything nowadays. But a few picks after that, hey, it's Todd Bertuzzi's nephew, Tyler Bertuzzi. Good pick. Also, the top prospects for the Oilers at the time looked like Oscar Klefbom. There were other guys like Justin Schultz, who immediately made the NHL a little bit before that. George Harkera was over there, and a few other guys who didn't really end up cracking the NHL soon. But for the most part, the Vancouver Canucks denied the idea of trading Cory Schneider to Edmonton, and they went with a much lighter package in New Jersey because they didn't want to trade a guy who was on the cusp of becoming an elite goaltender to one of their franchise rivals. Now, this is where the McDavid thing comes into play, because once Cory Schneider was traded to the New Jersey Devils in his first season with New Jersey, he had a .197 goals against average and a .921 save percentage. My goodness, that is insane. The next season, he had a 2.26 goals against average and a .925 save percentage. The goals against average went up, but the guy was saving pucks like crazy. He was actually negative in the win-loss category because the New Jersey Devils weren't all too great, but Cory Schneider was consistently one of the best players on the ice every time the Devils stepped out there. And that's the kind of performance the Vancouver Canucks did not want to give Edmonton. Now, because of that, Edmonton was bad. In 2014-15, the Edmonton Oilers were one of the worst teams in the league. They were second last in the West with 62 points, and they were third last in the entire league, with Buffalo and Arizona being slightly worse than they were. However, the teams that were above the Edmonton Oilers immediately in the standings were the Toronto Maple Leafs at 68 points, the Hurricanes at 71, and then you have the Devils at 78. What if Cory Schneider was on the Oilers? Now, you could say, oh, they wouldn't have gotten Darnell Nurse. Okay, but Darnell Nurse is good now. Back in 2014-15, he wasn't amazing. In fact, it was tough for him to even crack the league. When it comes to assets that the Oilers would have potentially given up to get Schneider, the second-round pick, the first-round pick, and the prospect, aside from Oscar Klefbom, there isn't really anybody in that pool that would have been an impact player for the Oilers in 2014 or in 2015. If Cory Schneider was the goaltender for the Oilers in 2015 instead of Ben Scrivens and Victor Fost, do you think Cory Schneider would have been able to steal a game here or there? Do you think Cory Schneider, with a performance of a 9.2 something save percentage compared to Scrivens, who had an 8.90 that year, and Fost, who had an 8.88 that year, would have been able to do better? I think so. I know the Oilers were bad, but I think an elite goaltender can win you at least, let's say, 4, 5 more games. If the Oilers win 5 more games, it puts their point total all the way up there at 72, meaning that all of a sudden the Toronto Maple Leafs are underneath them. The Carolina Hurricanes are underneath them. And that changes up the way the draft lottery goes, and that changes up where Connor McDavid ends up. Because Connor McDavid's draft year in 2015 was a crazy sweepstakes. Everybody was trying to say, okay, tank for McDavid, do this, do that. Spoiler alert, the worst teams in the league, the Sabres and the Coyotes, didn't get McDavid. The Oilers did, and they were the third worst team. If they had won 5 more games with a Cory Schneider as their starter, they would not have been in a position to win that lottery and draft Connor McDavid. Who knows, the New Jersey Devils without Cory Schneider maybe get significantly fewer points than 78. Maybe they end up with, 68, and all of a sudden they're tied with Toronto and they're in the sweepstakes for Connor McDavid too. So, that's a little tale that I wanted to tell today about how the Vancouver Canucks could, in some reality, have prevented Connor McDavid from becoming an Edmonton Oiler. Maybe if Connor McDavid was on a different team, he would have had, 130 points by now in a season. Who knows? I don't. You probably don't either. But I would love to hear your guesses down there in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video source out of Trost 99, and bye.